Airplane pilots of Reddit, what was your biggest "we're all effed up" moment that you survived and your passengers didn't notice? Welcome back to Reddit Chronicles. If you're new here, consider subscribing to help me feed my channel and grow my cat. And if you like the video, do kindly give it a thumbs up to help me out. Let's get started. This entire story occurred in less than 10 seconds and should have ended with the headlines on CNN. Military pilot and not commercial, but it still could have ended in a disaster. Flying a CH-47D Chinook helicopter in Iraq, mid-July 2008, when the temp was over 130 degrees Fahrenheit. That's about 54.5 Celsius for all the non-Americans. Packed full with 36 passengers at an altitude of only 100 feet and a speed of 140 knots, lower and faster than you'd ever fly in the US. We hit a thermal pocket of warm air that pushed us up, so I nosed the cyclic, looks like a joystick between your legs, forward to maintain attitude. I was a brand new pilot flying with a combat vet who wanted me to maintain altitude of 100 feet almost exactly, so no higher than 120 or lower than 80 feet. Nosing the aircraft down kept us from getting higher, but we immediately hit a downdraft and the aircraft started to fall like a rock. I pulled back on the cyclic as fast as I could to get the nose up, but it hit my body armor and wouldn't go back any further. I watched the altimeter drop all the way to 19 feet, and miraculously, we started falling and began to climb at the last possible second. During the debrief, the other pilot, now one of my closest friends, who had well over 1,000 combat hours, told me he's never been so close to dying before. I wasn't shook up until I heard that. Even typing this today gives me chills. Think of that, a helicopter going 140 knots, 19 feet, that's less than 6 meters from the ground. Yeah, that's pretty damn close to dying. This was about 7 years ago. I took my brother and 2 cousins for a short sightseeing flight one morning in a Cessna 172. I knew there was some weather coming in, so I wanted to get it over with quickly. About 20 minutes in, I noticed the clouds getting worse, and then some lightning off in the distance. Definitely time to head back. Heading back, I radioed my intentions, uncontrolled airport, but with a fixed-based operator, and someone radioed back with the current winds. It didn't compute what they said, and in retrospect, I should have asked for clarification. Got back to the airport, and as I'm on final, I realized just how bad the wind is, having a hard time keeping on centerline, and eventually go around on the first try. By now I'm starting to sweat bullets, and planning on rerouting if the next attempt doesn't go well. I make sure to turn the intercom off, so my cousins in the back can't hear how panicked I'm becoming, though I did keep my cool through the whole thing. On second attempt, I've got the rudder pegged to the left, and managed to get the wheels on the ground safely. I taxi to park, shut down, and jump out, and start shaking with adrenaline, and let out a huge sigh of relief. Cousins had no idea what just happened. It was an exciting flight to them. My brother kind of knew what was going on, and I let him in on what I was thinking later. Apparently, I had an audience of guys from the fixed base operator watching me as well, probably yelling at me to go somewhere else. I'm honestly surprised sometimes I managed that landing with no incidents, especially since that was basically my first crosswind landing. For anyone who doesn't know, a crosswind landing is when the wind is blowing perpendicular to the direction your plane is going. Well, what were the winds? How much crosswind does it take to run out the rudder in a 172? A lot. I've landed in a 20-knot crosswind, and even then I didn't run out of rudder. Man, some English would be pretty cool right about now. Wind fast, plane shaky. Oh, I see. Shaky no good. Make tilt. Big tilt bad. Plane go boom. Plane go turnt. Why say lot word when few do trick? I was in the process of getting my PPL, private pilot license, and I was flying circuits solo. Before I took off, the CFO of the flight school asked me if I was sure it was a good idea to fly. It's pretty windy. I was flying a Cessna 152 on a day with winds pushing 15 knots and turbulence around 20. I honestly don't know what I or anyone at the flight school was thinking letting me, a 16-year-old, take off. Anyways, a few bumpy circuits go by with no problem. I actually got some great practice landing in turbulence. So the last circuit of the day, I'm on final with full flaps, doing the absolute minimum speed for approach in a 152, not taking into consideration that the air is super turbulent. For those who don't know, When it's bumpy, you should be going a little faster on approach than usual. Anyways, I'm quite close to the ground, maybe 300 to 400 feet, and I can hear the wind blowing over the sound of the engine. Suddenly, no wind. I had just lost 15 to 20 knots of almost direct headwind on final approach, with absolutely no airspeed to spare. I remember my shirt sleeves looked like they were inflating, and the plane's stall warning started screaming at me. The controls became totally useless, like a limp computer joystick. Thankfully, I had my hand on the throttle, and like my instructor taught me, and for whatever instinctual reason, good instructor probably, I gently pushed the throttle all the way and slightly lowered the nose. All of this took place in the span of about 5 seconds. I remember what I did, but not thinking about doing it. It was like when you drive somewhere, and you suddenly realize you've arrived without remembering driving. Damn scary. Anyways, I landed the plane just fine, and went home and took a nap. My parents said I was pale as a ghost when I got home. Flying is fun, until it isn't. Damn, this guy's flying planes at 16. Maybe I should consider getting a pilot's license. Commercial pilot here. Not the most exciting story, but because there aren't any good ones yet, I'll reply. I was flying myself and 3 passengers over the Appalachian Mountains on a clear day. We hit some mild turbulence and the door opened to the cabin. The passengers all started panicking, so I basically said, "Chill out guys, this happens all the time," and tried closing the door. I couldn't get it shut while also flying the plane, so I simply landed at a nearby airfield and closed it on the ground. After the trip was over, I told the passengers that that was the first time that had ever happened to me, and I was slightly panicked as well. Not completely on topic, but I was an aircraft mechanic for the Navy, back in the day on A4 Skyhawks. Student pilot notices his canopy light is on, indicating his canopy isn't all the way closed and locked. He decided it might help if he cracked the canopy open just a little bit and close it again. I remember seeing it land as a convertible. We sent a couple of guys out in a pickup truck, where they found the missing canopy in a farmer's field. "The submarine door doesn't seem closed all the way, Jim. Do you mind opening it and slamming it shut so we know it's closed?" Uncoordinated turn, and all the fuel went to one side of the plane. Choked both engines, sputtered and cut out, 3,000 feet high, so brought back the coordination and pointed down a bit. They started back up. Yikes. Suddenly losing both of your engines. Yikes indeed. Not a pilot, but I work for an airline. We get emails about everything that goes on during flights. We get drunk passengers, dead people, and the odd person who ended up on the wrong plane and didn't know. We get an email from the bosses to say that someone left a note in the seat pocket saying that they've put a bomb under the seat. This was found by a passenger who managed to take the note up to the cockpit and speak to the main attendant, who spoke to the captain. The person did this without breaking a sweat. No one but the airplane staff and the person who found the note knew. I would have lost my shit. That person was an absolute hero. Turns out no bomb and the note was a prank. Still pretty insane though. Dead people? Basically, we had an elderly person pass mid-flight, not uncommon. They fell asleep in their seat and were traveling with some family and a random person who was sat next to the deceased. Essentially, the plane landed, everyone got off, and the person got past the dead passenger. The crew and family tried to wake her up, and she was unfortunately gone. Sometimes this does happen, as we've had people pass due to heart failure with no doctors or trained staff on board. Most know CPR, but it doesn't always help. Most of the time, it's avoidable, with it only being minor seizures or heart attacks. I never actually thought of that, but now that I have, it does seem like something that would unfortunately happen from time to time. Not a pilot, but my buddy has a private license, and we fly together often, just for his hours. I buy lunch, he gets hours. It's fun. I live in the PNW, I assume that means Pacific Northwest, and wanted to fly over Crater Lake one winter. Ceiling, 8,000 feet. Crater Lake, 6,000 feet. He doesn't have his instrumental yet, so he can't break ceiling. We fly over, have an easy time, and take great pics, etc. We get back to the airport, go to the bar, and he proceeded to tell me that that was the most frightened he'd ever been piloting. Why? The single-engine Cessna we were in could glide 2 to 3 miles in an emergency. Crater Lake is 8+ miles in diameter. In the middle, we'd be effed. I asked him what he would do. He said, "I'd nosedive into the water. You want to swim in that shit and drown, or die quick and mostly painless? F my life." Edit. Sorry guys. Freezing temps, ice and snow everywhere. Pics on my profile. Yeah, trying to swim for a few miles in freezing water during the winter doesn't sound like a very pleasant experience. I have a weird story from the perspective of a passenger. I was on a really tiny turboprop plane, maybe 10 rows, 2 seats on one side, 1 seat on the other side. On the side with 2 seats, the front row passengers had to sit with their backs against the cockpit wall, facing row 2. I was in row 2, so all 4 of us were in the first 2 rows, were facing each other with essentially a pile of legs in the middle. At some point during the flight, it got rocky. Then the plane did one big drop, and all of a sudden, all 4 of us heard a loud, angry alarm go off in the cockpit. Because we were so close to it, I knew the passengers up against the cockpit wall heard it, because I was looking them in the eyes, and they both had the same look I did. Holy F, we might be dying today. None of the other passengers on the plane were close enough to hear the alarm going off, so they remained unaware. The plane righted itself, and the alarm turned off. The rest of the flight was normal, and the pilot never said anything, so I have no idea what actually happened, or if we were all really about to die. To this day, I hate when I have to fly in a tiny turboprop. Edit. I just remembered a different turboprop shit show. I was on a turboprop from LaGuardia to Buffalo in January several years ago, flying back from a wedding in San Diego. The flight was pretty normal, minimal turbulence. I had just gotten my drink from the flight attendant, a ginger ale. All of a sudden, the plane dropped hard, as in straight down, fast, and a sizable distance. It was the worst drop I have ever experienced on a plane. People yelled and gasped, and my arm, which was holding the ginger ale, shot straight up in the air, and I dumped my drink all over me. Haunts me to this day. I would guess the autopilot couldn't handle the bumps and disconnected, which set off the alarm. Yup, you're absolutely right. At least in smaller aircraft, the autopilot will disconnect in extreme turbulence and put out a loud, blaring alarm tone to alert the pilot that he has no choice but to take control right now. It sounds terrifying, and even when you know what it is, it can still catch you off guard. But it's actually pretty harmless and doesn't mean a life-threatening scenario. Unless it's a 737 MAX. Oh shit. Not a pilot, but a passenger, was on a 16-seater turboprop when suddenly there's a loud bang. All the lights go out, and we drop. We're all looking around like, what's going on? Is this how we die? After a few minutes, the lights come back on, and the pilot comes on the PA and says, "Sorry about that, folks, but we were just struck by lightning. No need to worry, everything seems to be working, except for the radar. It's fried." I may have worried a little. Believe it or not, that actually happens pretty regularly. It's usually not a big deal. Planes are designed with that in mind. Once, departing Burning Man with a couple of passengers, my engine conked out. I didn't even follow the engine out checklist. I glanced at the fuel pressure gauge, didn't like what I saw, hit the switch for the auxiliary fuel pump, and it came back to life. The whole incident was over so fast, the passengers never even noticed. I wouldn't call it a "we're all effed" moment, though. Worst case scenario, I would have just set it back down on the playa, which is pretty flat terrain as far as the eye can see. Redundancy. High five. 2 is 1, 1 is none. I just want to say that's pretty good advice. If you're ever buying something that you need to work, it might be a good idea to see if you can buy 2. You know, like flashlights or keys or something. After all, there's a reason people keep spare keys, right? If you want more where that came from, simply click on one of these boxes right here. And if you liked the video, I assume you did since you're still here, remember to let me know by giving it a thumbs up. And of course, if you haven't already, click my channel icon right here to subscribe and be one of the first viewers for every video I upload. I'll see you in the next episode of Reddit Chronicles.